Thank you for joining Marianne and the professor this morning. I am delighted to be joined by Dr. Tony Schwenk, who also goes as Dr. Tony or Dr. Tony Freeman, and we'll talk about that more later. But Dr. Tony, thank you so much for joining me today to chat.
Well, I thank you too for having me on your show.
Well, Dr. Tony, we were chit-chatting before we started recording, and I want to back things up. I want to hear your background, how you're in Nicaragua now, running a famous clinic, medical clinic, but tell me the background of how you ended up in Nicaragua. What's the backstory here?
Well, that's actually a pretty long story for introduction. First of all, I have to correct, I'm not the one person who runs the clinic. I'm rather a socio. I'm sort of have joined in only since I'm in Nicaragua. The treatments which are done in this Clinica Curismo here in Nicaragua, the whole treatment protocol and regimen has been very puzzling to me when I first was introduced to it. But from my background as a naturopath and osteopath, profession which I have, well, work which I have been practicing for decades in Germany, I was just curious to understand what's been done in this clinic for almost 20 years and what Dr. Julius, the founder of this clinic, has been found out already in Germany when he started his work almost 40 years ago.
So how did you end up coming to Nicaragua? Your road has been long to get there.
Well, it's really a long road. I must start actually when I was 10 years old. When I was 10 years old, I lost my father. And I was brought up by my mother together with my sister. And I was already in those days a little bit a rebel. And with 15 years of age, I started motorcycle racing. And apparently, shortly after I turned 18 years old, I lost 3 of my very best friends in motorcycle accidents on the racing track. And only 1 year later, when I was 19 years old, the doctors told me I only would live for another 3 or 4 years because I had chronic kidney failure. I had so-called Bright's disease. And this brought me to the decision, actually, that why should I go for a career if I only live for a few more years? This caused me to leave Germany and just to enjoy life. And I went to Australia. And I migrated to Australia when I was not even 20 years old. In Australia, I was commencing my motorcycle sport, my motor racing sport. And apparently on Christmas Eve, whilst telephoning with my mom in Germany, I met a German South African guy. And because he understood what I was talking about on the phone, there was no mobile phones those days. It was a open air telephone in Sydney. And he then asked me how long I was away from Germany. So I said, listen, I'm only 6 months in Australia now. Then he invited me for a party on the next day. And at this party, I was bringing heaps, lots of meat, for barbecue and grilling. And at the end of this day, he said, listen, Tony, the way you live and the way you eat, you kill yourself. And this rattled me, gave me a shock. I said, why? He said, well, I give you a book, read this book. And a few days later, he presented me with a book written by apparently a German. His name is Arnold Ehret. And this book, the title of this book, it was one of the most important books in my life, actually, was The Mucusless Diet Healing System. And when I read this book, I learned that Arnold Ehret suffered from the same disease which I had. And I strictly followed his regimen and his recommendations. I became, within 1 day to the other, a vegetarian. I was fasting 3 times for 40 days in the follow-up time. And within 6 months, my kidney disease was cured. And this, of course, caused a fundamental disbelief in ordinary medicine because no doctor ever before asked me about how I was living. Apparently, the doctors will be dead by now, but I'm still alive. So this course was a first impact, it was heavily impacting my everyday life. I still commenced racing, and I had a bike accident. And on this accident, I broke my collarbone. And with this broken collarbone, I developed back pain. And with this back pain, I consulted an osteopath in Australia. And only 3 treatments cured me of all these problems. And this made me deciding I wanted to learn osteopathy. And that's what I started in Australia. So after 5 years, I went back to Germany, having the plan to start a clinic in Germany. But I learned I couldn't work without being a doctor, without being either a doctor or a naturopath. I can't open a clinic to practice osteopathy, which was pretty new those days in the mid-70s in Europe and in Germany. So anyway, I decided to do the course. And this brought me ultimately to do the naturopathic study and all the medical courses. And in the early 80s, I opened my own clinic in Germany. Apparently in the mid-80s, those days, European community, no, it wasn't the European community, but the European economic community, I realized that more and more natural medicine vanished from the market because they named it the novellation, the renewing of the pharmaceutical regulations. It originates from the European Union, but it had to be imposed from the German health authorities. So it was still separate, but it all came from the lobby groups of the European economic community, which have been very active, of course, financed and triggered by the pharmaceutical industry, which wanted to get rid of naturopathic treatment or naturopathy as a whole. When I realized this, I thought, well, maybe this work I am doing as a naturopath has not really a big future. And I started also to enter a new field of lecturing to make people more aware that we have self-healing powers within us, which can actually cure everything. And then I started to make seminars myself. I became a seminar leader. And so in the mid-90s, I decided to get out of the clinical work completely, and I just made seminars and trainings for other people to encounter, to find themselves, to find what and who we as human beings really are. So this was the way, and ultimately, by encountering all those things, from the pharmaceutical field, from the medical field, the changes which are coming. In the mid-90s, I realized that the monetary system was a scam because when Germany united East and West, it was necessary. The German government agreed that a common currency, the euro, has to be formed within 10 years. So that's when I woke up to the monetary system, what happened in the background. And though the course developed, and I sort of detected more and more who is running this world. Later on in 2010, it started when I realized that there was a red thread coming from the very early days of Christianity, Christianization, the church state, which later on integrated the Crown of England. And through the Crown of England, the colonization started. The colonization sort of branched over into industrialization and into imperialism. And from the imperialism, we went to certain stages of fascism in Europe, then in Germany. And this actually ended up where we are at the current time is globalism or globalization. So it's a red thread. Behind this red thread, looking at where it started from, I realized the Vatican has a lot to do on all this papacy, the Vatican and the Catholic Church. It's nothing to do with Christianity as such, it's the church as an institution. It's the papacy, it's the Vatican, it's the Jesuits, and it's the secret societies. And they all play together and sort of have created this system which we are facing today to get out of again. So getting out of the system actually started in 2014 when I started up to set my personal finances in a way that I can ensure to protect my assets. And by protecting my assets, I decided to move to Fiji, which happened actually in 2015, 2016. And I decided to set up a completely self-sufficient place, not being dependent on anything was provided by the system, to become independent and to become free. That's why I also named myself Freeman. And this setting up of my own place in Fiji ended basically in 2019 when the house was built and the garden was set up and had our own water, our own electricity, producing about 90% of our own food on the property. And then came COVID. And of course, this restrictions in personal freedom, not being able to leave the country, being forced to get vaccinated, brought me ultimately to Nicaragua. That's where I am now. So this was a long explanation. Sorry about the length.
No, it's very interesting. So essentially, you mentioned that you were trapped in Fiji. Tell me a little bit more about that. During COVID, you could not leave Fiji.
Well, what the world actually, and therefore the most people in this world don't know, that Fiji has the most restrictive government in the world, most restrictions for the public in the world. We haven't been able, well, on the island where I was, we had no restrictions. We've been lucky because there was not one single COVID case until they reopened the country again. We had no ferry connection. There was no flights to the island where I was. We've been completely isolated. But on the mainland, on the main island of Fiji, Fiji consists of 300 islands, and on the main island where the capital is situated, the restrictions have been utmost severe. People have not been allowed to leave their houses. They have not been allowed to meet family members, to go anywhere. Food has been supplied to them in their own places. People who have not agreed to the vaccination when it was introduced, they lost jobs. They lost the get Social Security paid without vaccination. They introduced the app which had to be used to enter shops once the shops have been reopened again for people. So it was so restrictive. And apparently in 2021, my permanent residency lapsed and I had to renew it. And I wrote backward and forward to the authorities, to the health authorities, to the immigration authorities, explained them my view of the pandemic, my view of vaccinations, and they refused everything. Sometimes I didn't answer, sometimes I just said, well, that's the rule of our law here, and if you want to stay here, you have to adapt to our rules. However, I didn't want to oblige. So eventually my residency lapsed in January 2022. I had a fake COVID pass for Fiji, but they detected that it was faked. So I was facing another slight problem. So I wanted to make sure just to leave the country as soon as I could. And I again approached the health authorities to get an exemption to board a plane, which was refused. Otherwise, the immigration department sent me letters they would arrest me for overstaying without residency in the country. And ultimately, I just bought a ticket and I went to the international airport and made the effort to board a plane on this day. And I was lucky encountering the public relation head from Fiji Airways, and I told them my whole story, a bit shorter than what I'm telling you now. And she said, listen, I'm trying to help you to get out of Fiji. And she linked me up with the Fiji Airways company doctor. And he understood my situation too, and he gave me an exemption to board a plane. That's how I could leave Fiji, and I left for Hong Kong because those days Hong Kong was the only place to transit without being vaccinated. From Hong Kong, I went to Doha in Qatar. From Qatar, I went to Switzerland. From Switzerland, eventually, I visited my relatives, my kids in Germany. And from Munich, I flew to Paris, and from Paris to Costa Rica, and ultimately I landed where I am now.
And now you're in Nicaragua. You must feel so grateful.
Yes, because I am free again.
You are
Yes.
free again.
Yes.
So when you arrived, well, actually, maybe I'll just quickly ask you, what is your view on the pandemic and the vaccination?
I think it's the biggest crime in humanity, what's been done. And it follows a plan, of course, you know, as all people who are, you don't even have to be enlightened to realize it more and more. But the narrative is carried on, the agenda is followed, and the media and the politicians, the puppets, play the game. But the good thing is, good news, games are played voluntarily. Games have a beginning and have an end. And no system has ever lasted forever. Systems has always ended again.
So what is your prediction? How is this going to play out? What do you think?
Well, I think it will still have a good end, but before things can end well, it needs a complete destruction, like when it needs a catastrophic end, and I hope it comes soon.
Yeah.
But I think you in Costa Rica and I think we here in Nicaragua, we have a good future ahead of us, and we are in a safe environment.
Yeah, it is a little bit, it feels a little bit like a safe zone.
It is.
Where the Western world is collapsing and developing world may pass through this relatively unscathed.
Yes. Well, that's the rules. I have written the rules for this game, you know. And as we can see with the BRICS states, they don't want to play those same rules any longer.
That's right.
It's just the good news.
That's good news.
Yeah.
So what is Germany's role in all of this? Because Germany is part of the EU, I sense a growing dissatisfaction in Germany. What is your sense as to what's going on in Europe?
To be honest, I don't have a realistic sense without being there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But they're asking me about the role of Germany. This would be really a separate talk, because the role of Germany dates back to 1871. And this situation, which dates back to 1871, is of immense danger for the whole world. This is why Germany, as a nation, has to be really kept down. It has to dissolve within the European Union. That was the plan, or is the plan of the elites, because Germany actually, following the Constitution of 1871, is the only free country on this planet. This constitution has never been abolished. This is the constitution of the German Reich. And the German Reich has not vanished. It's just not, has no administration. And the German Reich, as it stopped its active existence after the Second World War, the administration of the former German Reich is commenced as Federal Republic of Germany, installed by the allies of the winners of the Second World War. But this is a very complicated construct.
It's very, yes.
And you have to understand and know the real complete history.
Do you think most Germans understand the power that they have?
No, they don't. They're not aware of it because we don't learn it. It's not in school books.
So because they are unaware of the power that they have, they may not embrace it or take hold of it because of their ignorance.
Well, there is a certain national masochism in Germany also, because we feel just so guilty about what happened during the years of the Second World War, forgetting all the good things which Germania has brought into this world before those 6 dreadful years.
Well, I hear rumblings that Germany may want to break out of the EU. And I wonder if that is possible. Do you think that you will see that in our lifetime?
Well, Germany, or Federal Republic rather, is just a puppet, is another state of the US.
Yeah, exactly.
And
NATO.
yes,
NATO as well.
Well,
that's right.
We still have no peace treaty.
No.
From the Second World War.
So I want to switch gears and talk about medicine. Yeah. And when I think of Germany and medicine, I think of Germany as being the epicenter of holistic medicine. In the sense that historically, from my understanding, Germany had a very healthy healthcare system that was very holistic. Is that true? Is that accurate?
Yeah, that's pretty well the case. You know, Germany is basically the cradle of naturopathy, actually originating or having the roots back in old Greece, in the old Middle East places like Greece, you know, and Mesopotamia. That's in Egypt, you know. That's where a lot of traditional medical knowledge and even all the medical philosophies, they originate from those days, you know, and from Greece. And apparently the elementary theories, you know, and the temperaments, and this is all originating from old philosophies, and they have been integrated in German naturopathic theories and practices. This is why it is the cradle of naturopathy, basically. Paracelsus, Hildegard von Bingen, and all those people, they all been German.
Yes. So you witnessed the hijacking of naturopathy in Germany, right? And that was one of the reasons that you decided to leave.
Yeah, that's what made me decide actually getting out of the clinical work in Europe or in Germany those days. Because I already realized we have to develop other ways, you know, to protect, to save it. And I was actually very lucky having very old teachers, you know, at the naturopathic college I visited. I had teachers which have been, well, as old as I am now, in the mid-70s. I had teachers older than 80 years. And of course, they've been really well educated in traditional medicine.
So if we fast track to today, you're in Nicaragua, you're working at a clinic that was founded by Dr. Julius Hellenthal, another German doctor, naturopath. Tell me about the type of medicine that you believe in.
Well,
that's a big question, but
it is a huge question. Basically, I believe in energy. There is nothing but energy. Everything is energy, and energy is, as we know from quantum physics, is frequency, is vibration, and vibration and frequencies are basically, as we all know from our mobile phones, they are information. And our body has a certain form. And of course, if wrong information and wrong frequencies, wrong vibration are around us in terms of information, in terms of eating the wrong food substances, which I have experienced in my own life, they cause the formation, and the word information shows this already, there is form in it, it causes a wrong formation of our body. And the wrong formation, our body is nothing else first be a disorder of the body, and later it is a disease condition or an illness. That's how it all originated. And I think we have to go that far back, especially nowadays, if we look at all the chronic diseases which we have to deal with, the non-communicable diseases, all the neurodegenerative diseases, they all show up in patients, first of all, with a lack of energy, with chronic fatigue. So this indicates clearly that there is a metabolic disorder, a metabolic problem. And the metabolic problem means always that our mitochondria are not able to produce enough life energy or energy to keep life going in an orderly manner. And there is a lot of courses, of course, around all this.
Yeah.
But basically, health or disease are a subject of energy. That's where it all starts from.
So good health means that you have good energy and good metabolic processes in place, and your mitochondria are functioning in top form.
That's right.
So what sabotages the mitochondria? Because essentially I think of the mitochondria as the most fundamental energy production in the body. So if mitochondria is hampered, what blocks the mitochondria? Is it food? Is it lifestyle? Is it exposure to EMF? What is the cause?
Well, basically, you can say everything starts with the energy supply, which we make for our bodies or for our organism available. So food is nothing but source or stored energy. So the quality of the food, the origin of the food is very important. And the highest source of quality food are basically what nature provides us in form of vegetables and fruits. It's stored solar energy, which high protein content.
So veggies and fruit, you feel are the best form of energy packets for us to be consuming. What about meat, fish, chicken? What about those types of energy?
Well, it's pretty simple to understand. Basically, all meats and fish is secondary source of energy because those creatures, they have fed on something which was primary energy source. So eating for secondary energy sources in form of meat, it's already depleted of certain energies. And I wouldn't see it as bad to eat it. It's in certain conditions, it's necessary, even necessary to eat meat, but it's got to be moderate. And you have to understand how the metabolism, how digestion, how physiology works, because if you don't understand physiology, the process of digestion, you won't understand the process of pathophysiology. That means how diseases and disorders develop over time.
So when you sit down with a patient who is unwell, what are the questions that you typically ask of them to decipher what the fundamental problem is?
Well, you might be amazed now that I don't actually ask many questions. The patients here to the clinic in particular, in the old days, I asked people a lot of questions, I just go back to the old days, just briefly. I asked them how the bowel movements are. I asked them how often they can urinate, whether they have to go up and urinate at night. I asked them about what they're eating, when they're eating, how much they're eating. I always reminded we eat too much salt, too sweet, too much oily, greasy stuff, and we eat far too much. We eat when we eat even though not hungry, we eat because it's mealtime. Those things I asked in the old days. But now with the patients, which we have to deal with here at the clinic, we are actually not interested about patients' long stories, because basically we can track all chronic disorders all infectious diseases to very common, simple causes and very simple circumstances. This means basically it's disturbance of the energy flow and of the energy availability in the body. It's degeneration, and degeneration is the opposite of regeneration. So if a patient is weak, it gets sick, it means the degenerative processes are higher than the regeneration capacity of the body. And this questions, first of all, to understand what stops a normal regeneration, how can we enhance regeneration, and what causes all the problems of degeneration. There is basically only very few. It's chronic inflammation, it's chronic infection, and that's about it.
So if someone is presenting with chronic inflammation, chronic infection, how do you guide them through recovery of this problem?
Well, this is actually the big win I had coming to Nicaragua and meeting Dr. Julius here, Dr. Julius Hellenthal, because he's been practicing a very interesting program which initially puzzled me because he's using antibiotics. And as a naturopathic orientated therapist, of course, I completely disagreed with antibiotics. But I had obviously not the right knowledge about how antibiotics can be used in a different way, because antibiotics are commonly used in medicine for acute infectious diseases, and they are utmost helpful for acute conditions. And they are prescribed corresponding to the recommendations of the pharmaceutical industry. They're usually taken twice a day, or 3 times or 4 times a day in regular spaces in order to kill those bacteria which are causing the infection. However, it's a completely different effect if you take 1 or 2 different antibiotics only once a day. Because if you take an antibiotic only once a day, first of all, it doesn't affect the gut biome. It might, of course, kill a certain amount of the gut biome, but it is not able just on with 1 tablet, for example, to kill all gut biome. And if you take another antibiotic, for example, 8 hours later in the evening, this might affect other living organisms, microorganisms of our gut biome, but neither doesn't destroy them again. So within 1 day, the gut biome can recover again because the gut bacteria is very much alive. They reproduce very fast. And this is the main effect, not to having a negative impact on the immune system, because the gut biome is very important for a healthy, functioning immune system. So this is what I learned here in the clinic. And also they make infusions, IV infusions of so-called reserve antibiotics. This is always the beginning of the initial treatment of a patient here. And this doesn't affect the gut biome at all. And the other thing is, we are using here at the clinic very regular and on a very long scale over 3 to 6 months antiparasitic drugs. And antiparasitic drugs are not only important when you live in the tropics, but they are very important for many chronic conditions, because parasites, which almost everyone in our today's society have to deal with. Every organism is full with parasites, and they are basically continuously overburdening our immune system, and ultimately can compromise the immune system, which can enhance or can open the doors for developing cancers.
Well, that's very interesting, because there's a lot of talk right now about cancer being caused by parasites. And yet doctors, traditional doctors, don't like to talk about this.
Well, you're opening another door now with the cancer and parasite subjects being caused by parasites. Apparently, to understand the treatment regimen of the Clinica Curismo, because I'm only here since 8 months, you see, in the clinic, and for Julius, it's self-explanatory what he does, and he doesn't explain, he wasn't able, or he didn't explain me the real pharmacology and pharmacokinetic of anti-parasite drugs. So only some weeks ago, a month ago actually, I started to investigate the pharmacology and the pharmacokinetic of antiparasitic drugs. I detected something very interesting. Studying those scientific papers of manufacturers of antiparasitic drugs from European manufacturers, I learned all what's commonly known about how antiparasitic drugs work. However, by studying the published studies of Indian manufacturers of antiparasitic drugs, I detected that those published papers, peer-reviewed papers, also mentioned off-label effects of antiparasitic drugs, and those off-label effects have been many different types of cancers. So this made me curious, and I carried on my search and investigations. Then I started to look into the definitions, the medical definition, scientific definition, what cancer is and what parasites are. So, and then I detected that apparently cancer is mainly dealt with in medical science. However, parasites are mainly dealt with in the science of biology. So those two sciences are kept very well apart. The definition of cancers is a very simple one. Cancers are defined in benign or malign. Parasites are defined by the way they are transmitted. They can be transmitted vectoral, they can be transmitted via food, or they can be transmitted by bugs, for example, by ticks. So looking at what cancer cells are, how cancer origins, and the behavior of cancer cells, and looking at the physiologic behavior of parasites, there is so many parallels that it makes completely clear why antiparasitic drugs must have an effect on cancer, on tumor growth. And this is what we are doing in the clinic.
So this is cutting edge medicine to be treating cancer with antiparasitic drugs. And yet I agree, it seems as though the research exists. I did a search, a very simple search of ivermectin and cancer on PubMed. And I found 200 or 300 papers on it showing incredible efficacy. And that was a very simple search, putting in one major antiparasitic like ivermectin.
Yeah.
So I have the feeling that this knowledge has been completely suppressed, right, by the big pharmaceuticals, because antiparasitic drugs are cheap.
That's right. Because, well, you have to know who owns or who manages assets of the big pharma. They're all managed by Vanguard and by BlackRock and State Street and Charles Schwab and all those big entities, which are pretty well known to more informed people. So money rules the game. And apparently antiparasitical drugs, they're dirt cheap.
Exactly.
And so the pharmaceutical industry is not interested to make it known. And knowing that all the shareholders, all the shares, the main shares of the media, of today's mainstream media, it's also held by Vanguard, or mainly by BlackRock actually, and is ruled by the Council of Foreign Relations. The Council of Foreign Relations regulates all media worldwide. So this is why the media doesn't publish anything of those news. This is why we have all the censorship. So it's all so simple if you know how the game is played and who is holding the strings.
So if we go back behind the curtain even more, do you think the Jesuits, the Vatican, these secret societies, do you think they are behind the curtain of State Street, BlackRock, Council of Foreign Relations? Who do you think is behind the curtain here?
Well, I think the Jesuits play still a major role, as the Jesuits are controlling the secret societies. The Jesuits are playing into the Club of Rome, the establishment of the Club of Rome, which has actually introduced all this climate change based things in the mid-80s of the last century. You just have to read the books, published by the founder of the Club of Rome, then you know where it all originates, where the roots are. So the pharmaceutical industry is actually playing the evil game in terms, and they're financing the World Health Organization.
Yeah.
And the World Health Organization is a sub-body of the United Nations. They're not even legal entities, neither the United Nations nor the World Health Organization. So if you read on the website a disclaimer of the health organization, it states in the last time that there is no responsibility and no legal measurements can be taken against any publications made on the website of the World Health Organization. But all governments say they just follow the recommendations of the World Health Organization. So they're playing the fool with the people.
Yeah. So the World Health Organization has no authority, but they exert power and control over every country.
Yes.
Every member country. It's remarkable.
Yeah, the countries have made agreements, and the World Health Organization is financed by NGOs, by trusts, from people which are big shareholders again in big important industries.
Exactly. With ulterior motives and agendas and power and money as the ultimate goal. So we have a very insidious process underway here. So if I jump back to the medical side of it, there's a lot of you talk a lot about the antiparasitic drugs. You talk a lot about dealing with the chronic inflammation and infection using antibiotics. So using antiparasitics and antibiotics to treat a lot of these chronic conditions is not what our physicians are telling us. This is definitely counterculture in the medical world, right?
It is so since about the mid-80s, when the pharmaceutical industry started to lobby, and when the pharmaceutical industry took over by financing the universities, financing all the professors, and the professor which teaches the new the new doctors at the universities, all the study plans, they are now composed and created by the industry, which does the research, and though they say it's evidence-based, but the evidence-based means is rather what we do in the clinic here, because evidence is given when a treatment works, so then there is evidence. The healed, the cured patient is better evidence than scientific evidence done by models, like we have seen the modeling of climate change, the modeling of COVID, of the COVID pandemic. All the recommendations, they are solely being based initially on models, but not on real facts. So there is no real evidence about what now medicine does. It's all science, which is being introduced by the pharmaceutical industries, which have interest to earn money.
So
money makes the world go round.
Money does, and always, follow the money. if you want to
Therefore,
see really what the agenda is.
yes.
So when you are presented with patients who are coming to you probably from every corner of the world to your clinic, are you seeing patients that do a very speedy turnaround, or do you see patients that you can't help because they've come too late? What's the typical scenario when a patient comes to your clinic with chronic illness?
Well, basically, most patients which are coming, well, there is one group of patients which suffer from cancer. However, cancer patients mostly have one or two more chronic disorders. Some of them have diabetes. They have high blood pressure. And of course, they have to be, those conditions have to be looked at as well. And this currently, you asked me what my experience was. So this actually was one of the very first, most puzzling experiences I had. There was a patient, he came actually with a cancer. It was an elderly patient, and we measured his blood sugar, and he had 480 blood sugar, which was extremely high. And he didn't take any medication. He didn't know of his high blood sugar. And just by changing his diet, within 2 days, the blood sugar, on the second day, the blood sugar went down to 240. And on the third day, he had a completely normal blood sugar. He got only 2 infusions of reserve antibiotic. And we started immediately the antiparasitic treatment. And the diet was changed. He was only allowed to eat pineapple in the morning and a little bit of papaya. And he was allowed to eat eggs in the morning, 2 or 3 eggs. And the next meal had to be taken between 2 and 3. And the meal was not allowed to contain any grains, no rice, no pasta, and no corn, and no dairy product, and no meat. And within 2 days, the blood sugar was completely normal.
Wow. So is this no grains, no dairy, no meat requirement typical for most of your patients who come in?
I hope I don't disencourage people who listen to this, but yes, it is one of the points in the diet which is necessary to be stayed on continuously. Once you're healthy, I say, well, every now and then, maybe once or twice in a month, you can even do with a pizza, you can have pasta. But during the actual period of curing, of bringing back the immune system to a normal function, it is bringing back the gut biome to a normal function, the metabolism, bringing people back to more energy. It is absolutely important to not eat any grains, any cereals, any bread, any pasta, any rice or corn, or no dairy products. And this works wonders.
Well, then what do people eat? Because fruit and vegetables, okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here. Vegetables, do they not have a lot of phytotoxins?
Well, they are still better than all the chemicals which are in, for example, white flour, especially paraquat, which remains in the white flour, which is heavily disturbing the intestinal lining, the mucosa membranes of the gut, and which is causing leaky gut, or which is causing malabsorption of nutrients, of nutrient substances. This is far worse than whatever can be provided from naturally, or from grown, from veggies and from salads and from fruit. Apparently, we are very fortunate here in Nicaragua. We get all year round very good fruit, and most fruit, especially if grown on trees like mangoes, papayas, they don't get heavy fertilizer. You don't have to spray them, with any antiparasitic drugs. And this is very important. And I think the most important thing is also to have long eating windows between the main meal of the day and between the first meal in the morning. This
Like a intermittent fasting.
like intermittent fasting. Yeah,
So you would say have a meal in the morning and don't eat again until mid-afternoon.
yes, mid-afternoon, then have a long break to the next meal next day morning. And apparently most patients, they're confronted with such a new lifestyle, dietary regimen, and they stick to it because they pay the treatment. So we can guarantee at least for 7-8 days that the patients stick to this regimen of diet, and they experience immediately the well-being and the well-being again.
So
Days.
you have good compliance with your patients because they're paying.
Yes.
And then hopefully they continue this regimen when they get home. So essentially it sounds like in the morning, a couple of eggs and pineapple, and mid-afternoon, more fruit, more vegetables, and that's it for the day.
Now, basically fruit in the morning, because this raises the blood sugar.
Right.
But the blood sugar, no, it doesn't actually raise the blood sugar. It supplies sugar to the body, and it goes immediately actually to the liver, and it can be utilized immediately to supply energy to the body.
Right.
The main meal in the afternoon shouldn't contain fruit. It should be composed of. You can eat potatoes. However, it's best to prepare the potatoes maybe a day before, put them overnight in the fridge, because this creates so-called resistant starch. And this resistant starch enhances the build-up of healthy gut biome, because the gut biome lives preferably on resistant starch, and this resistant starch does not interfere with our digestion.
Very interesting. So in the afternoon meal, besides potatoes that are preferably prepared the day before, what else? What else is part of that afternoon?
They can eat huge salads. They can eat huge vegetable dishes. I always personally recommend broccoli, Brussels sprouts, carrots, pumpkin. All this can be eaten. It can be combined with sardines. It can be combined with fish. Once or twice a week with chicken is not a problem.
Okay, so there is some protein source in that afternoon meal, maybe some fish, maybe some poultry. How about lentils?
Well, they're very hard to digest. Most people coming to the clinic, they wouldn't be able to handle lentils and legumes.
Right.
Because they are causing digestive disorders. They cause bloatedness and gas buildup, because the digestive abilities of most patients, they impaired. They don't produce enough digestive enzymes. So you have to put them on a very simple diet, which can be easily digested and made available, that they can make available energy, which they need.
So really, you're trying to assist the body and make it as simple as for the body to extract energy.
Yes,
from the food.
There's a simple way. Get rid of what's not supposed to be in the body, meaning detoxification, elimination, enhancing elimination, and feed the body what it actually wants and what it can utilize easy. That's it.
Now, I find it interesting that you're not concerned about glycemic index of your fruit. You're talking about pineapple, mango. You're not worried about high sugar content fruit, because we always hear that we should steer towards low glycemic fruit like berries. This is not an issue for you.
No, we don't see any problems with having fruit in the morning. Well, it's not a big load. You can eat a fair slice, 1-inch slice of a pineapple, and you can even eat more from a papaya, because papaya almost has a very low glycemic index too, and it doesn't raise. It's not big impacting the sugar household.
Yes.
And also papaya has got papaya as well as a pineapple has very valuable enzymes, proteolytic enzymes.
So really, when you're talking about having a high glycemic fruit like pineapple, you do control the quantity. You
Yes,
say
you-
1 inch slice, so you're not eating as much as you like.
No.
You control the portion size.
That's right. Well, if a patient is still available to exercise, if a patient is fit enough to make exercise, for example, I bring you my example. When I was setting up my place in Fiji, we had we had 250, 280 pineapples a year growing on the own site. So virtually, I was eating half a pineapple, almost sometimes one pineapple a day. I was eating 4, 5, 6 bananas growing in the garden. I was eating pineapple all in one day, but I worked 10, 12 hours physically, very hard. So this sugar coming, or this fructose coming from the fruit was utilized and used up. So it's all different if a patient is energy depleted and comes to the clinic. He only should get a low amount of fruit. He should eat maximum half a banana a day, because banana has a very high glycemic index and provides a lot of sweetness. But he can eat half a banana because it's a little bit filling. It's got a lot of fiber substance. Patients can eat, for example, coconut. It's no problem. It's perfect for breakfast as well.
Yeah.
It's just the composition of the breakfast. They can eat berries, blueberries are perfect. They can eat pitaya. It's called dragon fruit. It's not very sweet. It's a very high antioxidant, very well antioxidative capacities,
Right.
which are very important. So there's abundant supply of food here, which makes it very easy to compose a nice breakfast for the people, colorful breakfast also.
Yes. So I find it curious that food staples like rice or quinoa are not part of your protocol. Why?
Well, you mentioned rice. Rice actually is the least problematic carbohydrate or grain in terms of carbs and in terms of, has a lot of carbohydrates, but rice is mainly a problem because of the content of arsenic. A lot of arsenic in it. So that's why the consumption of rice is not ideal. It's a toxin, arsenic, and it burdens the immune system, of course. And you should try to unburden the immune system and not put any further burden on it.
And how about something like a quinoa?
I can't give you actually a proper answer to this.
Yeah.
Coming from Germany, I never used quinoa.
Yeah, quinoa is more of a recent player in the carbohydrate world. But it's very interesting that this diet, you see tremendous results with your patients. So they come in, you are putting them on IV infusions, monitoring their diet, maybe giving them some antiparasitics, some antibiotics, and then you're seeing tremendous results.
Well, there is 2 or 3 more treatments we apply. It's a whole program. It's got basically 4 or 5 columns, we integrate in the treatment. But it always starts with the reserve antibiotic IV. It starts from the very first day with the change of diet. And then we give the people a bioelectric treatment. This is not very well known method, originating already 40, 50 years back again. It's called the bioelectric or galvano treatment, where we use electro frequencies to almost inform cell structures to change the frequencies. And
is this like a Fife machine? Or what?
No, it's different. We're using patches and we send electric currents through the body or through a tumor. And the tumor cells, they have a different resistance than healthy cells. And by impacting or bringing those tumor cells into a vibration, which is not favorable for them, they start to stop metabolizing, and this eventually kills internally on an informational path tumors. And I have a very interesting example. There was a young woman, she was only, I think, 35 years old. She had a uterus mouth tumor. That was one I witnessed when I was in the clinic. And she had continuous bleeding for months and months and continuous lower abdominal pain. And on the second day, after the second day, when she came on the third day, the bleeding has stopped. And on the fifth day, one day before we ended treatment, the lower abdominal pain was completely gone, and the pressure feeling she had in the lower abdomen and the pelvic region was also disappeared. So this was the most amazing effect too.
Do you follow up with scans on your patients to see the before and after of MRIs or different scans to detect the cancer and the shrinking of the cancer?
We don't follow it up in the clinic because patients leave normally within a week or 10 days.
Right.
But with this very patient, I am still in contact. It's now almost 5 months, 4 months. And the tumor has not reappeared.
Really?
Yeah.
So you say there's 5 pillars of treatment. One is diet. One is the IV infusions.
Yes.
Another is antiparasitics.
Yes.
Another is antibiotics, and another is this frequency treatment or
bioelectric galvanic treatment. Yes.
Okay, the bioelectric treatment. Are there any other? Is that?
Yes, and then comes actually one specialty of the clinic here. We're using embryonic stem cells.
Tell me about that. I know nothing about that.
You know nothing about that. And the embryonic stem cells, they are used in combination with a so-called autovaccine, which is produced from the patient's own blood. So this combination, but let me explain you first a few words about the stem cell treatment. Stem cells become very, how should I say? They become more and more used now in rejuvenating medicine, even in used in ordinary medicine, because they allow to earn a lot of money. And they open up stem cell clinics all over the place. I understand also in Costa Rica, charging the patients a lot of money.
Yeah, and I hear people flying to Panama for stem cell research, and it's always very expensive.
It is. However, Julius has started stem cell treatment almost 40 years ago in Germany. And because there was no stem cell science done those days, but he followed a regimen which he sort of developed himself. And as stem cells are not easy to source, unless to get them from aborted babies, he sourced them from the umbilical cord of newborn children, because apparently the umbilical cord of newborn babies still contains stem cells. Stem cells are actually original first cells where our body is built from. That means when the egg of the woman, the mother, is fertilized, fertilized from the sperm, the reduplication of this very first cell starts and forms sort of a conglomerate of cells. And all these very first cells, they duplicate within 8-10 days, multiple times. And then you have this very first conglomerate of cells, and they're all stem cells. And stem cells have the ability to differentiate, because out of those very first cells, which contain the information to transform into all cells we eventually have in our organs. This means all various organ cells, nerve cells, liver cells, kidney cells, spleen cells, connective tissue cells, blood. It all comes from this original conglomerate of stem cells. But those stem cells, as they differentiate, they ultimately are reduced in our body after birth. They are not available any longer. but they still are abundant, available in the umbilical cord, in this jelly-like substance which fills the inside of the umbilical cord. And Julius started to source his stem cells out of this substance, and he developed a process to develop him in the lab and to make them available, if possible, to be injected. And this is why we speak at the clinic. We are using real embryonic, human embryonic stem cells, not compared with stem cells which are used in many clinics, which are laboratory generated. They're used from aborted babies, and the stem cell material from those fetuses and aborted babies are brought to laboratories, and they bred in petri dishes, reproduced in laboratory space, because of course those stem cells can be produced much cheaper and in bigger lots, in a bigger amount.
So you're using human stem cells from the umbilical cords of born babies, and then that is injected, these are injected into the blood of your patients.
No, not into the blood, into the subcutaneous tissue.
And what happens then?
Well, as they are cells which are undifferentiated, out of those cells can reduplicate. They have a metabolism.
Yeah.
And they can duplicate, and they can transform into any other body cell of the patient. So they can trigger a natural way of regeneration in the body, and the body knows what to do with them. The body
how interesting. Do you inject them into the area of the body that is compromised, or where do you inject these cells?
Well, in some cases, they are injected into the body, into a joint, for example.
Right.
Which I personally don't favor, but it has been done whilst I'm at the clinic. But mostly those stem cells are in combination with the auto vaccine. They are injected in the region of the umbilical belly, into the subcutaneous tissue, but not IV, because if you would inject them IV or IM, they could eventually cause an allergic reaction. But if you inject them into the subcutaneous tissue, they never cause any problem.
Interesting. So interesting. So what pillar do you think is the most important of the 5?
Well, it depends on the stage of a disease condition. You know, I consider a very important one the antibiotic treatment, because it starts off, to unburdening the immune system. With the combination of the bioelectric treatment, you can really alter or change or even destroy malign tissue, bad cells, like in a cancer and tumor.
Yeah.
And with the other vaccine, which I will talk about it in a minute, you can also enhance, strengthen the immune system, or modulate or retune the immune system, because there is different situations in our immune system. It can be overreactive, for example, in allergies. It's an overreacting immune system, or even in worse cases when people have developed the autoimmune disease. But there is also far more cases where people have a dysfunctioning and weak immune system, an overburdened immune system caused by the constant infections and ongoing inflammations. Mm-hmm. Because constant inflammation, mainly in the gut, are causing a constant overburdening of the immune system, because the immune system battles those inflammations and those infections.
So a leaky gut. So a leaky gut situation that's triggered usually by food causes inflammation throughout the whole body and compromises the body.
Yes, because a leaky gut, for example, it causes an inflammation of the inner lining of the digestive system primarily, And secondarily, those substances which are digested or even not fully digested, they partly absorbed through the mucosa membrane to the mucosa of the gut, and they enter the lymphatic stream, and the lymphatic stream is a major part of our immune system. And of course, if food is not fully digested in the right way, broken up by the digestive enzymes, the body detects them as something foreign, as something strange, and the immune system is triggered to battle against it. And it can be even measured in a healthy person in the bloodstream. If you take blood of a patient and you measure the white blood cells, and then the patient eats, and within 5 minutes after eating the first little bits of food, you take blood again, you see the difference in the amounts of white blood cells. It's called,
and so fascinating.
Yeah.
It's called, I'm sorry?
It's called the postprandial lymphocytosis. Postprandial, that means after eating lymphocytosis caused by eating.
So it sounds like our food is one of the biggest culprits of causing the original health issue.
That's why we really insist of not eating grains and not eating pasta, which is made from grains, because this is causing constant inflammatory conditions. Our body actually is not constructed to digest grains, because grains are basically originating from types of grass. And they just how should I say, they're produced, you know, by science,
Yeah.
to produce food.
But it's not a natural food for humans to be eating.
For the old, in the very old days, thousands of years ago, when we have been hunters and wanderers, we depended food-wise on what we could kill and what we would find under the ground.
Exactly.
Root
vegetables, and then fruit on trees and animals that we could hunt.
So it's basically very simple if we understand nature and our own nature.
Very interesting. So the gut biome can recover if we provide the right food. So that's the goal here, is to get the gut biome in a healthy state again.
And it's amazing how fast the gut biome can recover within days if you don't trigger it again by wrong food. And even with antibiotic treatment, the gut biome is not impaired by any means. Patients never get diarrhea, which you normally often experience after antibiotic treatment.
Yes.
And in combination with the antiparasitic treatment, the gut biome is also massively enhanced and is reestablished.
Are you putting people on a long course of antibiotics, or is it quite short? Are we talking 2 or 3 weeks or 1 week?
Well, in some conditions, well, most patients apparently, they are on an antibiotic course, changing the antibiotics periodically. They are on antibiotics between 3 to 6 months. Various antibiotics. And we have to differentiate between antibiotics. There is antibiotics which have an effect to reduce the duplication effect. They reduce the speed of duplicating bacteria.
Yeah.
Then there are some which really kill, and there is another group of antibiotics which interfere with the metabolism of a bacteria. And the antiparasitics, they have also 2 different ways of pharmacologic effect. They can destroy the membrane, the outer skin of a parasite, or they can disturb the metabolism of a parasite and kill it off by this means. And this is what antiparasitic drugs do also in cancer cells, apparently.
Well, it's so interesting because we have been told go on as short a course of antibiotics as possible, quickly get on probiotics to restore our gut biome. So we've been misled quite dramatically.
Yes and no. For acute treatment, there is the rule as high as necessary, as short as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so, but there is bacteria, a certain family of bacteria, they call spirochetes. They call spirochetes because they have spiral form. And those spiral form bacteria, they are apparently caused by leptospirosis, by Lyme disease, so-called Lyme disease, which is a very doubtful disease, and also from syphilis. Syphilis, the sexual transmitted diseases, not gonorrhea, but syphilis. And those spirochete bacteria, they have a very unfavorable behavior because they love to reside in nervous tissue, and they really have the ability to stay dormant for long periods. And being dormant in nervous tissue, they are not causing any symptoms. So this is basically a symptomatic disease, what they named COVID, by the way. But this is the real asymptomatic condition. However, if you make a long course treatment with the right antibiotics, only low dosage, of course, as from the beginning, you can reach those dormant, persisting or resistant bacteria in the body, and they die off. And it's known, for example, especially with syphilis. Syphilis is a disease which you catch, and it can be treated perfectly within the first few weeks without side effects. But if it's not treated correctly, it can persist for a lifetime, and it sort of flames up again after 10, 15, 20, 30 years.
So what portion of your patients come in with a Lyme's or syphilis infection that they're completely unaware of? Because those are hidden in a ways.
Well, people come in with, I would name it, neurodegenerative disorders like multiple sclerosis, like Parkinson, more and more Parkinson patients, Alzheimer dementia. Precursors of Alzheimer dementia are, by the way, morbus Meniere and tinnitus. Patients with Alzheimer and dementia always have previously suffered from tinnitus or from morbus Meniere, or both combined. So those neurodegenerative disorders which patients are coming with, they are mostly in connection with spirochetes. I don't say syphilis necessarily, I don't say Lyme disease, doesn't matter. Mm-hmm. But just by following up this treatment course Julius has developed, we realize it works.
So are you seeing patients with dementia come into your clinic and you treat them for this type of bacteria that's hiding in the, hiding in the body, yeah, in the neurological, it sounds, that they hide in the brain. Are you actually seeing a reversal in dementia with your patients?
Well, I've seen also wonders in the clinic. I remember a 78-year-old patient, he was having dementia. He was vaccinated. He had palsy, facial paralysis, hemiparalysis. Yeah. And that's why he actually came. He was unable to communicate, to speak, very difficult to walk. And on the third day of the after the first other vaccine and embryonic stem cell injection and bioelectric treatment and reserve antibiotic injection, on the third day he started to speak.
Really?
He was able, after 2 weeks, to eat himself alone again. He didn't need to be fed. And this was most amazing, and the state was going since about 15 years already with this patient. He lives
And-
here in Nicaragua.
And how is he doing now? Do you sometimes see a complete reversal?
Well, it's not a complete reversal, but it's definitely an improvement.
Yes.
His relatives, his daughter, is most happy. And of course, the person who has been caring for this man, for this patient, she has a much easier life now with him.
So at least you can halt the deterioration and maybe even reverse some of the deterioration.
Yeah, stopping the development of neurodegenerative diseases is possible.
Yes.
I have witnessed only 1 or 2 cases so far with MS, which have improved. I haven't actually followed up how far the improvement has gone, but the patients have been very happy what happened in MS cases, and 1 case of ALS as well so far.
Very interesting. What about autistic children?
Well, autism is a huge problem. We haven't had any autistic children since I am in the clinic. Julius had treated a lot of autistic people, kids in Germany already. Apparently, as far as I am informed, not in Nicaragua, because the treatment in kids with IV injection is a little bit difficult. It was not so difficult in Germany, but autism is in direct connection to previous vaccinations. And the vaccinations are causing a massive disturbance in the immune system of those children. And the immune system, compromised immune system, is again inflicting problems on the nervous system, and this is the cause of autism. Apparently also with schizophrenia, he has had very high successful treatment in Germany.
So, Dr. Julius, in Germany with the autistic patients, what sort of outcomes was he witnessing?
It was a complete cure.
Really?
Yes, and very, very rapid, within months, within 6, 8 weeks, is that the kids started to talk freely. Kids changed complete the personality.
So why can this treatment not be made available in Nicaragua? What is it that is hindering treating the autistic children in Nicaragua?
Well, I can't see any problems why it couldn't be made available.
Yeah.
I think there is headwinds coming from ordinary medicine, from medical sites.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Nicaragua actually is very simple to obtain the necessary medications because everything is far more liberal here.
Yes.
The availability of all medicines is very, very good, unlike in the States where they make antiparasitic drugs and certain antibiotics very difficultly available. So also in Europe. This is why people come to this country from all over the world, because we can do the treatment here.
You can access the medication that you need, that you know is effective.
Yeah, and very cheap too. For example, just one example, the ivermectin is sold in Germany for I think $49 1 packet with I think 4 or 6 tablets. In Nicaragua, you buy 24 tablets, which is half a year's supply, I think, for less than $4 or $5.
That's just, it's a tragedy that the pharmaceutical companies are manipulating these prices in such a way. Or I know in Canada, we can't get our hands on ivermectin.
Yeah.
It's a black market item. Even though the WHO listed it as one of the top 5 most important medications in the world, and even the founder or the creator of ivermectin won a Nobel Prize 5 years ago, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They've made it illegal in this country, which tells me it's highly effective. It's an important drug to have in everyone's medicine kit. But so what do you mean by auto vaccine? You
Well,
mentioned that term. What is that?
Well, auto vaccines, autogenous vaccines is another
Mhm.
expression for the same thing. It's got a long history. It's been started to, the research into auto vaccines started more than 100 years ago. And apparently it was stopped soon after the Rothschilds started looking into developing, started researching into pharmacology and started into researching into modern medical science. This was started in 1913 in Europe, financed by the Rothschilds. At the very same time, the research into other vaccines has started, and it's been used for many, many years, but over the last 40, 50 years, it fell more and more into oblivion. However, other vaccines are massively used in veterinary medicine to treat infections and treat inflammations, mainly therapy-resistant conditions, and it's also heavily used in Eastern Europe. However, Western medicine almost lost everything what they knew about it. But Julius uses this method since a long time, and it's basically a very simple method. We take the blood of the patient. This patient blood is settling and is separating into the blood plasma and then the solid part and the blood corpuscles and the solid parts of the blood. And from this plasma, it is also again separated, and from this plasma, the bacteria, the contained information and real bacteria are augmented thousands of times. So it means it's the effect is enhanced, and then those bacteria are killed off, they are destroyed again, and this is then produced into an injectable product and mixed with the embryonic stem cells and injected.
Oh, so this is a process where you're taking the blood out of the patient.
Yes.
You're taking the blood out of the patient, and you're treating it, or I don't. So the blood is removed and then put back into the body.
Well, in simple terms, we take the blood. We are using the plasma and processing an injectable or producing an injectable liquid from the content of this plasma by enhancing the bacteria. And this is a really booster for the immune system. The immune system then can relearn and restore a normal functioning immune system again.
Oh,
Because certain of the abilities of the immune, which the immune system once has had and has forgotten, it's sort of reinstated again.
I see. So you take the individual's own blood.
Exactly.
Okay, so there's not going to be any rejection or anything like that.
Completely
Oh,
risk-free.
that is so interesting. So that used to be a routine treatment that was abolished by the Rockefellers and company.
Well, I don't know whether actually it was stopped by the Rockefellers, but apparently maybe it's a coincidence that at the same time, it started at the same time, the two methods, or the research or the work financed from the Rockefellers and the research done from separate sides, into the auto vaccine theories. But over 50 years of using this method, before mass vaccination became popular in the 50s and 60s, that's when the time still was, those vaccines have been used. But when the mass vaccination started in the late 50s, early 60s, this vaccination sort of was pushed away from the market. And now
Wow.
doctors don't learn about it unless you research yourself. A lot of information on the internet about this.
That's so interesting. So tell me, are you treating people with vaccine injury?
Yes, lately it became a subject because post-COVID vaccine syndrome or vaccination syndrome is becoming more and more abundant. Not as much here in Nicaragua, because those people have not been pressed and forced to become vaccinated, but from patients which are coming from other countries with their disorders and diseases. And of course, they have also underlying problems caused from the vaccination. And we are dealing with this situation also with patients. And currently we are also underway to develop a separate treatment course, or to adapt the treatment which is done at the clinic, to adapt it specifically for post-COVID vaccination syndrome.
And so are you seeing success with the vaccine injured?
To be honest, we haven't had individual patients coming especially for post-vaccination syndrome, but the treatment regimen and the, how should I say, the working hypothesis behind it, what the syndrome actually is, why it developed, the pharmacology behind the vaccine, and the pharmacokinetic, what the vaccine actually causes and does, explains why this treatment shall or will help. I'm pretty sure it will be an effective treatment.
Very interesting. So what do you think was in the vaccine? There's great debate as to what is in the vial.
Well, I think it's not so much important what other additional substances have been in the vial, because those additional vaccine enhancing ingredients, it's not very well known what they put in, what shit they put in. However, the pharmacologic effect of the artificial created mRNA is pretty well known what this mRNA does. Because the vaccine as such, the so-called vaccine, because it is not a real vaccine, it's a genetic therapy. Mm-hmm. But this artificial created, laboratory created genetic mRNA enters the body. This is distributed through the body. It doesn't stay only in the muscle where it is injected into. It is distributed in the body. It enters certain organs, especially membranous tissue, membranous cell structures. And in those cell structures, this RNA starts to produce proteins in the cell plasma. And those created proteins are spike proteins. Mm-hmm. In other words, they create artificial spike proteins, which have nothing in common, or very little in common, with the original corona spike proteins, which appeared naturally since many, many years. Because spike proteins and SARS-CoV viruses, so-called viruses, are around since 35, 40 years. Mm-hmm. And those SARS-CoV related spike proteins, they are different protein compositions to those proteins produced from the artificial created mRNA. Mm-hmm. And as there is also, this is a little bit more complicated, but I just mentioned it briefly, there is also so-called retroviruses. They're pretty well known in medicine and science. And however, because of retroviruses, which are apparently very abundant in the placenta of pregnant women, those retroviruses can carry mRNA even into the nucleus. And this is why it can be called a gene therapy. And if mRNA is transported into the nucleus of a cell through a retrovirus, it can cause a genetic change.
And how do you reverse that? If indeed we're looking at gene therapy and there is a genetic alteration in the body, how do you reverse that?
Well, a genetic reverse is impossible.
Yeah.
all what can be done to inhibit the artificially produced spike proteins, which are produced inside the cell,
Right.
but they are released into the outer cellular space,
Yeah.
in the extracellular space. And of course, those spike proteins carry again the information of the mRNA.
Right.
And this spike protein reduplicates as well. But the question is, how long is a cell reduplicating caused by the RNA within the cell plasma? How long is it reduplicating new spike proteins, which the body later on detects as body strange protein and triggers the immune system? Now, this process, the destructive process of the released spike protein and destruction of the spike protein production, the protein synthesis inside the cell, this has to be stopped. And this can be done apparently also by antiparasitic drugs.
Exactly. They're very effective in blocking that process. Do you have any comment on obesity or consumption of sugar? Any comment on that?
Well, obesity is caused and in conjunction with non-communicable diseases. It's mostly in conjunction with wrong eating, too much starchy food, and denaturized vegetable oils, all the seed oils, which are very bad for our metabolism. They're all heavily industrialized or industrial manufactured products, indigestible, and they just straight away store away in fatty tissue. They blow the fatty cells excessively, fill excessive fatty cells and stored away in fatty tissue, and that was called obesity.
So how do you deal? Okay, so first of all, are there any oils that are good? Olive oil, avocado oil?
Basically olive oil and coconut oil. Avocado oil is to a certain extent questionable because it cannot be extracted directly from avocado flesh. It has to be, it is an industrial process again to manufacture it, to produce it.
Okay,
but it's still better than the ordinary cooking oils like sunflower oil and canola oil and soya oil. And mostly of those products, they also come from gene manipulated crop.
Right, like corn. So essentially, olive oil and coconut oil are the only oils that you feel very comfortable with. And then
ghee is good, which Indian people use. Ghee, and also butter. Butter is the most natural fat you can use.
So fat is good. So for people who are struggling with weight, what is your protocol at your clinic? Do you get many people coming in, and what do you do with them?
Well, we have had people for treatment which been overweight, massive overweight. The biggest weight loss we had within 10 days was 10 kg, just by changing the diet.
Oh my goodness, that's massive. So the protocol for people with a weight issue is what? Same? Do you do everything, or is it
basically the same? All people which are treated here, they lose automatically over time the weight.
They lose weight. But for someone that is overweight, they don't need all the parasitic treatment, the antibiotic treatment. They need to adjust their consumption. Is that right?
Well, we don't basically treat just overweight patients because they always have accompanying chronic disorders.
Whether it's diabetes.
As we know from statistics nowadays, that 60% of the population, actually global population, over 40 years of age, suffer from at least one, and out of those 40%, 60% suffer from more than one chronic disorders. So this speaks legions.
So so if someone is overweight, there's something else going on typically that is a metabolic disorder of some type.
Mostly not diagnosed at this early age. Because obesity is not a disease. It's a disorder.
So, but there's an underlying disease, and the weight is a byproduct of that.
Well, I have to go back to the very first beginning of what I said. I said a disorder has to do with the body, and the disease has to do with up here. Not at ease. That means it's mainly something wrong with the mental state. Not that somebody is crazy, but rather not be enough aware about the lifestyle, about the eating necessities to nourish our body in the right way. So this is actually the disease, because to be in ease, we eat all this nice tasting and good food. This gives us ease. And this ease is also stress, and stress, as we know, is a very massive immune system compromising factor.
Yeah.
Psychoneurologic diseases. Appears in this new field of science also.
Yes. So when people come to your clinic, they are there typically for a week or 10 days, being educated, and they have all of your, what does that look like for a visitor to your clinic?
Well, mostly people are recommended from other patients, which is a big benefit. People have severe conditions, which is also a benefit because it really gives people hope, and it makes people more compliant than they are normally compliant to other doctors. That's the biggest problem with medical work, non-compliance of patients. And once, in many cases, people, if they feel better, they fall back to the old lifestyle. And this happens very rarely with patients which are here at our clinic. They come with severe conditions, so they're really in need of getting a treatment. They have a high trust because they recommend it, and compliance, last but not least, is enhanced and is strengthened. And this is rather enforced because the treatment is not cheap. It's on the wallet, you know, which makes people also compliant, which is tough on some patients which don't have the money, but I see it as a very important aspect to really provide help to people.
Yes. So do you have any last message to share or impart? That what else would you like to tell us?
Well, the first thing I would like to tell people, which is actually my vision in life, my vision in life is that a world where people are healthy, where people are aware of and know who and what they are part of nature, they are actually nature, and where people get up in the morning and say every morning, I love life. This is my personal vision. And what I can give all the listeners and viewers of this video on the way is go and start walking this way to learn first about what and who you are, and start to be critical about what you are recommended from all different sources. If it's away from nature, if it's not in compliance with what nature is and what nature shows us and what nature wants us to do. It's the biggest teacher we have around us.
So Dr. Tony Schwenk, if people want to contact you, how is that possible?
Well, they find us on the internet. There's a website which unfortunately is not up to a modern standard yet. We might be working on it. They can Google us, and on Google they also find, I think, my telephone and Dr. Julius's direct telephone and our email address.
So the name of the clinic again?
Clinica Charisma.
Clinica Charisma.
Yes.
Okay. So I will include that in the notes so that people know how to contact you.
Yes.
This has been a most interesting conversation. And I have found it fascinating. I just thank you so much for your time.
Yes, it's a pleasure.
Yes, and your work is tremendous. It just reminds me of that good traditional European medicine that used to be considered, I don't want to say normal, but it was the traditional medicine that was wiped out. But you've kept it alive.
It's true, and I'm very grateful that I have been able to share this information with you and with the field. And I'm also very grateful to myself that I didn't trust the medical profession when I was 19 and a half years old, when they told me that I would live only for 2 or 3 more years, because there was no dialysis those days.
Your own personal story is quite a testimony to the fact that there is hope. And here you were written off, and yet a very good doctor came alongside you and gave you some hope, and it worked. Look at you now. How many years later?
It's true.
So
I'm also very grateful that I have been integrated in this work at the clinic. And I'm grateful mainly for learning so many new things, which have been withheld from other sides, even though I walked the way of medicine since 45 years.
Well, it must be very gratifying to be helping patients who are really desperate with chronic conditions or acute conditions. To think that you can get them on the road to recovery must be tremendously rewarding. So keep up the great work. And I hope to eventually meet you in person.
Yes, it's my mission to share and service.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for your time, Dr. Tony Schwenk, and we will stay in touch.
Thank you so much for providing so much time and the space to do this interview and this talk.
Oh,
Thank
you're
you.
so
Blessed to you. Be blessed.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So we're back. We were just chatting after this interview, and I thought that maybe I would include everyone in this conversation, because we were talking about the fact that, first of all, in Canada, the number one problem that I am witnessing being back here in Canada is that people have chronic health issues and are so frustrated because their doctors will not acknowledge the issue that they're having, which may or may not be vaccine related, but they also can't find a doctor to treat them in a speedy fashion. The queues are long. Doctors are gaslighting patients who have new issues, and people are frustrated. So I feel as though your clinic may provide a glimmer of hope for people who are really struggling. And even if they can't come to your clinic, they might be able to look into some of these treatment alternatives and find some help. So that's the first thing that we were talking about. The second comment I made, or that we were discussing, is that people will not hesitate to drop money for a new car or a vacation, but they're reluctant to spend money on their own health out of pocket. And I think this is a Canadian phenomenon because we're used to having universal health care. We're not used to spending money on our health. But if your health is compromised, life becomes quite abysmal. And so I think we almost need to frame it that what better place to sink money than our own personal health? Because if your health is optimal, you enjoy life. And isn't that what this is all about? You know? Yeah. So I think that although your treatment may be expensive, it's relative to, we have to consider, where else do we spend money? And why do we spend our money on things like, say, a new vehicle or a vacation, when perhaps spending money on your health is a better investment?
Well, I look at this in a very simple way. I say, I am worth it.
Yeah, exactly. I think it really is worth it, because it's your physical state, it's your mental state, and your enjoyment of life is really hampered if you're not feeling well.
And on the other side, knowing what with our money system will happen rather sooner than later, I rather spend the money for my health and for my well-being and for having joy and having a good life.
Absolutely. You had a story that you were about to share with me. Would you like to? Yeah.
About the money and the cost of the treatment. I remember there was a lady from Honduras, and she's married to a Nicaraguan, and we encountered them in a cafe, and we had a talk, and then she realized what we are doing, and then we invited them on a short call to the clinic, and at the clinic we commenced our conversation, and she said, well, she was due for an operation on her arthrotic knee. And then we said, listen, I wouldn't get this operation because you don't get the guarantee, because it was clearly visible that she had a chronic inflammation throughout her body. It was not only the knee problem, you know, it was a systemic problem she was suffering with. So we recommended her, listen, just do a treatment with us and then decide what you do with your knee. And she said, and then we told her, listen, but this treatment is $17,000. And she said, that's no problem. And be reminded, this lady is from Honduras. And she said, that's no problem, because I was going to the States and this knee surgery cost me $55,000 in the States.
Wow.
So I never knew how expensive treatments are in the US.
So people are already prepared to spend big dollars on some of these surgeries. Next to that, these rather invasive treatments, your treatments are looking rather economical compared to some of these more dramatic ones.
That's very true.
Yeah. Well, thank you again.
Okay.
And we'll talk again. I'd love to kind of follow up with you and see how things are going with the clinic. But thank you.
Maybe we find other subjects one day.
Absolutely. Okay. Thanks again,
Okay,
Dr.
bye-bye.
Jody Schwenk. Okay.